And the mechanism of questionnaires today. So this is what we are up to. I hope you can hear me. Okay. So let us start. So as we have done in past sessions, as has been reiterated again in past, that we have started from a point where we were trying to understand how to carry out research. We have done a process, the steps which are followed into it, and after that we have tried to understand the scales, all right, the sample size, and now we are at a stage when we have understood the scales using which data is measured. Now we will try to understand today the instruments which are used to collect the data. All right, so these scales that we have discussed last time are actually part of these data collection instruments. So today we will discuss one of the most popular methods of data collection, that is questionnaire. You must have come across a questionnaire of this sense or that sense at some point of time in your life, wherein you are given some questions and you have to give an answer to them. So you would have also wondered that why I am being asked this question when he is trying to measure XYZ. There are times when we as an individual are asked to do some study. We make questionnaire by our own and then we get it filled from the respondents, and on the basis of that we do give the results. But let me tell you a very important thing about questionnaire designing is that questionnaire designing is not something which is based on our gut feeling. I cannot come and say that if I have to measure personality of yours, then I think that I should be knowing whether you are an introvert person or an outward person. So on the basis of that, I'll be able to tell you what is your personality. So there is a difference between gut-based questions that we include as part of our questionnaire when we are trying to measure anything, than the scientific methods that we follow while trying to formulate the questionnaires. So today we will understand one of the pioneering method that actually has been suggested by Gilbert Churchill. He is the fellow who has given these steps to form a questionnaire, and these steps would not be typically book steps that we would cater to or we would find out in any of the books that talks of questionnaire designing, but that involves some statistical computations to be done. And when we mean that computations will be done, then it is a scientific method, and that is how and why we call it a scientific method. So let's start and understand what Gilbert Churchill has to say about it. And before starting this, we have to get some of our concepts clear before going ahead into understanding this. Now, let me make some terminologies clear to you, which we will be using intermittently while discussing the designing of questionnaire. Now, the first one being a construct. So, suppose I am trying to measure attitude of XYZ or personality of PQR. All right. Now, something which I am trying to measure is something which we call as construct. All right. So, construct would be conceptual term which I will use to describe a phenomenon of my interest, which I would rather be trying to measure by means of a questionnaire. All right. So, if I am about to develop a questionnaire about learning style of an individual, then construct for me in this would be learning style. So if I'm trying to develop a questionnaire for attitude measurement, then attitude is my construct. So anything which I'm trying to measure, I would call it a construct. One more important term that is used time and again, and that term is scale, SCALE. Now do not confuse, because scale is something that we have also used last time when we were trying to understand nominal, ordinal, interval and ratio, but they were something which were actually about assigning a number and placing them onto a continuum. So that domain, the scope of those scales were to that extent. But behaviorists and theorists and literaturists have given this term scale to a standard questionnaire. So, standard questionnaire, when we are talking, standard questionnaire would mean a questionnaire which has been accepted worldwide in order to measure anything. So, I hope you are hearing me. Yes. So, A standard is an important word here. The standard that we are trying to follow would be a thing which would be used across the globe to measure anything. Now, let me make it a little bit less complex. What I'm trying to take home is, suppose today you as an individual think that I want to measure attitude of an individual. So attitude of an individual, you say that question number one is this, question number two is this, question number three is this, and four is this, and these questions will help me in measuring attitude of an individual. And I go to a respondent and he gets it filled, and you say that this is his attitude, right? So now this is a questionnaire which you yourself has developed, right? So suppose you are sitting in Hyderabad and you today develop this questionnaire, and you say that this is something which is a questionnaire to measure attitude of an individual. Now I sitting in, say, in Nimrana, I use it and I found that no, it is not a proper questionnaire to measure attitude of an individual, so I will challenge it. So there is someone else who is sitting at some other place. He says that no, this also does not, I do not also buy the fact that this measures attitude of an individual. So this would not become a standard questionnaire, which means it has not been accepted by the people worldwide. But the questionnaires which are developed scientifically, questionnaires which are developed with the use of some statistical tools and techniques, these are the questionnaires that actually has a larger probability of getting accepted even when our demographic changes and even when our country changes. So you will eventually find, when you will go back to literature, that lot of constructs that today we use in to measure any of our characteristics are actually the ones that are not developed into our country. So now we are talking of West individual who has developed a questionnaire to measure, say, personality. Now that has been adopted in India, and people in India are trying to measure the personality of people using that construct, which actually has been developed somewhere in states. So the probability that the scale would flow here in India would be little lesser than the probability of those scale or those items or those questions which actually has been developed without considering the mathematical computations. So that is actually the prime difference between uh, a scale which is developed with statistical calculations keeping in mind, and the scale which is developed without these mathematical calculations. Now, when a questionnaire which has been designed is widely accepted for the very definition, for the very characteristic that it is trying to measure, then that questionnaire is called a scale. All right. So the scale here would become something which has been accepted worldwide. So you must have heard about Freudian theory of personality. You must have heard about Big Five personality traits. So which means that you go online and you find various websites which says that okay, I will measure your personality, what type of personality you are. You fill up a questionnaire, you press onto some radio buttons, and in the end you get your personality type. Now these are the scales which has been accepted worldwide to measure anything. So when a questionnaire is accepted worldwide to measure anything, then we start calling it a scale, and scale is a standardized thing. Standardized would mean what? Standardized means that it isn't accepted as it is to measure a construct. So that is something that we call a scale. So before going ahead, we should also get ourselves clarify with a little with some more terms, and the term in line next one is item. Now item is something which are your questions into a questionnaire. Now suppose you come across a questionnaire and someone is asking you what is your name, and there is a blank space, uh, and then you write down your name. So this question, what is your name, in research terms, that is something which is called as item. All right. So if a questionnaire has 30 questions into it, so we would say a questionnaire has 30 items into it. All right. Now, then another thing that we should very precisely understand before going ahead is that whenever we are talking of developing a questionnaire, what essentially we are trying to do is we are developing a questionnaire to measure characteristics of an individual, but not the individual himself. So this is an important thing. Important thing in the sense that When you are trying to measure my personality, personality is my characteristic that you are trying to measure. You're not trying to measure me. I actually am a bundle of lot many things. I also have some attitude, I also have a personality, I also have a learning style, I also have some motivation, I also have some behavior, the way which it can be explained that I would behave in certain situations. So I am actually a complex bundle of all these things. So you as a researcher at any given point of time would only try to understand and measure one characteristic of mine. So we essentially try to measure characteristics of individuals but not the individual themselves. So this is what the questionnaire is for. So we have to get it very clear. So these were some of the important terminologies that we would be using. So going ahead now, we will address some very simple questions, though they look very simple, but they're very important from the point of view of developing a questionnaire. So the first question that anyone would ask is that suppose you are trying to measure anything and let this anything be attitude. Suppose you are trying to measure attitude of an individual. So a single question or a simple question that we would ask from ourselves would be that should I have a single question or single item in my questionnaire or should I have multiple items? So multiple items would mean more than one item to measure the same thing. The same thing here is attitude. Right? So this is a simple question. So one question trying to measure attitude and lot many questions trying to measure attitude, right? So this is a very prime question that we will start our developing of questionnaire with. So the answer to this question would be multiple items. So we would never ever try to measure any characteristic with just one item. So we have to have multiple items, which means we have to have many of questions which are trying to measure only one thing. Alright, so here one thing we are talking of is attitude. So we would not go for single items, and there are a lot of reasons for it. Because suppose if I am about to check spelling capabilities of an individual and I ask him that okay please spell Chandigarh to me, and if he happens to get it wrong, I cannot say that he's not good at spelling. Maybe by chance that he got Chandigarh wrong, but maybe that he's very good at spelling mistakes. So measuring anything with just single item would be as good as trying to measure ability of an individual by asking just one question. An individual who may be very good at so many things, but situationally he is in a situation that he is behaving differently. So just looking at that behavior of his, one cannot predict that he would be like that. So we should not and never ever try to generalize the results on the basis of one statement only, and that is why we say that we should have multiple items into our questionnaire. One more reason for having multiple items would be that there are times when customer or the respondent that we are talking of try to bluff ourselves or bluff us. He would essentially try to give us the results which eventually are not true. All right. So meaning thereby that if there is only one item in the questionnaire and he happens to bluff us, then we would be ending up with a very wrong data. So when multiple items that we are talking about, now these multiple items are devised in such a way that they cross check what an individual has asked for. Now suppose that you ask someone and you give him a knife and say, okay, what do you make out of it? He says that I will kill someone. So now you know his thinking process is such that he will kill someone using a knife. Now the same fellow, you do not give him time and you ask again, there is a knife, what will you do? And now he says that I will chop down the vegetables. Now these are two different personality traits that this individual is showing, and this cannot be one individual only. So the cross-checking of the responses which respondent gives is an important phenomenon that one has to adhere to, and that can only be done when we have multiple measures. So that is the answer to this question, whether we should have single or multiple items into our questionnaire would be multiple items. So this is what Gilbert Churchill said in 1986 when he gave this paradigm of developing a questionnaire with scientific method is marketers or anyone are better served with multi-items measure than a single item for their constructs. And this conclusion partly true for those investigating behavioral relationships. So we have to have multiple items when we are trying to measure anything. That is what Gilbert and Churchill said. And in fact, today when we are trying to understand the method of developing a questionnaire, I have not gone into the books which says that This is the process. This is something that we should follow, but we will try to actually do and understand that how do we come across and what problems do we come across while developing a questionnaire. That was all eventually given by Gilbert Churchill. This is the work which was published in a journal. So then, once we have decided that it will be multiple item but not a single item, so the first thing which Gilbert says needs to be done while developing a questionnaire is that we have to specify the domain of the construct. All right. So now let me put it in another words. Now, construct is something that we understand. So if I am trying to measure attitude of an individual, so construct for me would be attitude. Now, domain of construct would mean, domain is a plain English word, and we would understand eventually what domain means. But to put it in perspective, domain of construct would mean that we have to actually define that what actually attitude is. So if I say, now suppose I am trying to measure satisfaction, for that I am trying to develop a questionnaire, I have to define what is satisfaction actually. So satisfaction, literature defines that there are two things. One is something which is expected by an individual. One is something which actually gets. All right. So what he expected, if equal to that he gets, then he is satisfied. And if he gets less than what he expected, then he is not satisfied. And if he gets more than what he expected, then he is enthralled. So that is how we tend to define satisfaction, which can also be construct likewise as we are discussing attitude. So we have to actually define that how does satisfaction relate to different domains or different dimensions. What are the different dimensions of attitude? What are different dimensions of satisfaction? So we will define a domain. We would say that when we are trying to measure attitude, then eventually maybe personality comes into picture. Maybe XYZ will come into picture. Maybe PQR is also part of attitude. So defining a domain or specifying a domain would mean to have a big sphere which actually would have everything which is associated with the construct as such. So construct here, if you take as attitude, then we will try to have this sphere which encompass everything which this way or that way, directly or indirectly, related to attitude. All right. So we would first of all define this thing. And now why this definition and specification is important, because when we will go in further stages, we will not look beyond this sphere which we have defined now, and we are calling it a domain. I will not go beyond domain when I am trying to deal anything which is associated with a attitude of an individual. So that is why I have defined this domain. Now this is my world and I am trying to formulate this scale, and hence I will only be referring to this domain of mine when I am trying to define a questionnaire. So once you have said that these are the things which directly or indirectly are related to attitude. So when we were talking of satisfaction, we say expectations and perceptions. Expectations are what I expected, perceptions are what I actually got and what I actually am perceiving. So whatever is related to expectations of an individual, that would be part of our domain. Whatever is associated directly or indirectly to perception of an individual, that would also make itself has to be the part of domain of satisfaction. So likewise we would define domain of anything, any construct that we are trying to measure. All right. So once having this domain defined, we will generate the sample of items. Now items here, as we've already discussed, are nothing but questions. So now I have this domain, now I have this sphere before me. So now what I will do is I will brainstorm and I would say that okay, what are the questions that you think should be asked in order to measure these parts which are actually inside our domain. So now our domain of satisfaction says that expectations eventually is associated with uh, satisfaction. So what I would do is I would try to jot down the number of questions or the number of words which are actually associated with the measurement of expectation. The same way with perception. So perception, if I think, is part of our satisfaction theory, then what all are the questions that you think or I think would eventually be measuring perception of an individual? So I will pen down everything. So the idea here to generate a pool of items is to have as many questions as you think that would be perfect and would be okay and would be measuring this thing only that we are trying to measure. We will make a list of it. So what if they are 50? What if they are 100? What if they are 300? What if they are 500? What if they are thousands? So you think that okay, I'll just ask you what to do. What will you ask if you have to measure personality of an individual? What do you ask if you have to judge the satisfaction level of an individual? So you say that I would be checking, are you happy? All right, taken. I will make it part of my list. Another says that I will try to measure, are you sad? That also, I mean, for me is a measure which essentially will tell me whether I'm satisfied or not. So I will also make it a part of my questionnaire. So likewise, I will do exploratory research, means I will explore it, brainstorm it. All right. I will go to experts, I will go to customers, I will go to stakeholders, I will go to everyone who is associated directly or indirectly and who can eventually, I feel, would be able to give me a clue of what should be asked in order to measure this thing. But all that has to be within the domain that I have specified earlier. So I will do literature survey, what literature talks about satisfaction, what literature talks about attitude. Literature says expectation minus perception is something that we get as satisfaction. So I will refer to literature and then I will try to see all the other dimensions which are actually related with expectations and perception, and then I will also have questions relating to them into my this pool. So I will do brainstorm, I will just bombard my thoughts and have these questions list before me. Expert opinions, obviously I will go. So the idea is to have this pool of items which should actually be withholding within the domain that we have specified in earlier steps. All right. So what we have done essentially till this point is, first of all, we have tried to domain of the concept that we are trying to measure. And after this domain, we would have generated a pool of items that we see or we believe or we argue that can potentially be good questions to measure something that we are trying to measure. Here we are talking of attitude, here we are talking of satisfaction. So suppose that these are the things that I think actually would be measuring satisfaction of an individual. So I'll make a list of all these items. All right. Now suppose let's take an example that I have 300 such statements to measure satisfaction. Right. So this pool I have generated 300 items. Now, emphasis at early stage of item generation, this is an important line, would be to develop a set of items which tap each of the dimension of the concept, and that is why this domain was important to specify, because the domain will actually tell us that have we covered everything that is associated with the construct. So that is how specification of domain is important. Now, then next step would be to purify this measure. Now I have this pool of 300 items with me. What I have to do, I have to purify this, which means I have to rule out the statements, all right, which actually are not contributing much to my measurement. I have to keep the statements which actually are important for me in order to measure the construct that I am trying to measure. So this purification step is an important step, and that has to be understood thoroughly. And this is the only thing which is technical in nature, would involve some mathematical computations, right? So how do we delete the items? I mean, as we have discussed in the beginning, I mean, I cannot come one day and say that this I think do not measure, say, satisfaction of an individual, and I hope that this should not be part of our question on just the basis of my opinion, right? I cannot delete an item or I cannot delete a question. When we talk of research, it is not opinion based thing, it is mathematical based thing. So I have to have a statistical or mathematical proof of saying that out of these 300 items, say 250 items are something which I should delete, and I should go ahead with these leftover 50 items. So what should be the process of eliminating the unnecessary items out of this pool? Or you may also say, what is the process of selecting the good items out of this pool of 300? So that is something that we are arriving at. So this obviously cannot be done opinion based. It has to have some mathematical support behind it, and that is where again statistics comes into play. And there is a model which is called as domain sampling model, which uses the concept of statistics, and it is this model which actually help us in purifying the measure, or in eliminating the unnecessary statements that we have made part of our pool. That is something that we will do using domain sampling model. So let us understand what is this domain sampling model. So is it making sense till this point? Are you getting it? Okay, Rajat. So are you getting it what you discussed by now? Okay. So now we are getting back to our PPT. Fine. So this domain sampling model says that what we have to do now. Suppose, let me go back to our uh, dear friend, which is Excel. Without it we cannot do anything. Now suppose I have this 1 2 3 4 5. Now I am getting on and on and on with this till 300. Suppose I have all these items, all right. This is something which I feel, or let's drag it down to some little more number and let's make it say 241. So I have generated a pool of these 241 items which I feel would be measuring satisfaction of an individual. So as per domain sampling model, it says, have a look at this first line. Purpose of any measurement is to estimate the score that would be obtained if all the items in the domain would be used. Now that is an important statement and we have to make a meaning out of it. What does it tell you is, now I have generated the pool of 300 items which I feel are actually measuring satisfaction of an individual. So I cannot go to an individual and say, okay, here is my questionnaire. It's having 300 questions, so please fill it up and I will tell you what is your satisfaction level. This is summarily rejected. I mean, who is going to stop and devote a time for 300 questions? No one. So the idea is to have the minimum possible number of questions as part of our questionnaire, but they should cover the entire construct that we are trying to measure. So, but this measurement, suppose ultimate questionnaire of my satisfaction contains only 15 questions, and having studied these 15 questions, I would be able to tell satisfaction level of an individual. Now that measurement that I am talking about, now let us see the assumptions, or let us see the base of domain sampling model. It says that purpose of any measurement, all right. So measurement here is our satisfaction. So purpose of this measurement would be to obtain a score, all right, to estimate a score that would be obtained if all the items in the domain would be used. So what does that mean? We had 300 items, right? So suppose if I go to an individual and I ask him 300 questions, so what score I get, then suppose that score is A, all right. Now if ultimate questionnaire I had only 15 items, so this 15 items should be giving me a score which is suppose A dash. So what we are trying to understand here is that this A should be equal to our A dash. Now that is the purpose of our uh, measurement, all right. So I want to have minimum number of questions that gives me a score that actually can be obtained if all the items in the domain that we have enlisted would actually have been made part of my questionnaire. So that is as good as saying that what is the purpose of sampling that we have done other day. Purpose of sampling is to give me a generalized result which should be as close as to the result that I would have got if I would have gone to each and every individual and asked the question, rather than asking the question from those hand-picked number of people that we call a sample. So which means the idea of having a sampling done is to have a score that I would have got had I have done census. Census is to go each and every individual, right? So that is something that I am coming up at. So now these items that I have, I have to get them some treatment. So again, very important thing which domain sampling model says is that a primary source of measurement error is an inadequate sampling of domain of relevant items, which is very true. So what does this line mean is, now suppose out of these 300 items you happen to pick up 15 items. Now if you wrongly pick up these 15 items, now that would be the major source of your measurement error, and that is what has been seen. If you would go back to literature, you will find a lot of scales actually has been revised or have even been terminated because they were having a huge problem with measurement error, and that was because that they have some questions which actually are not measuring something but they meant to measure. So if I say that question ABC actually measures attitude, when essentially it is not measuring attitude, then it should not be part of this questionnaire at the very first place, but it is. And that is because that selection of these items, selection of these questions has not been proper. All right, and that becomes the major source of error. All right, now this is something that we are trying to arrive at. So now is an important thing that we are talking about. So which means it says that basic to domain sampling model. So now we are coming to statistics, and the simple concept that we will use here is correlation. Is a large correlation matrix showing all correlations among the items in domain. So to understand it, let's get back to Excel. So we have 300 things here. Alright, we have 300 questions that we are trying to treat up. So it says that if I can have a matrix, so you all understand matrix. If I can get to here, and if I can get to, suppose, say 241, which is the number of my items or whatever, suppose let's take it to 300. So I have a correlation matrix. Now if I call it a correlation matrix, and now suppose I get it to be 1, because correlation between 1 and 1 would always be 1. So let's suppose the correlation between 1 and 2 is 0.23. Now, if in the same way I can keep on having correlation between each and every item, I would get an infinitely large correlation matrix. So, infinitely would be a wrong word. The word infinitely there means because we do not know how many items in the pool would one be having. So, here we have taken an example of 300 items that I am having in my pool. So, I will be having a matrix which is 300 by 300. It will have 300 rows, it will have 300 columns. So, this will essentially be a correlation matrix which actually tells me correlation between each and everything. All right, now to explain it little more, I would like you to have a look at this SPSS sheet. I do not have an idea that how much or if at any given point of time you have come across to SPSS or not. If yes, then it is very good. If no, even then, the concept that we are trying to understand out of this would not require much of the understanding of SPSS as such. Now, I've taken this example data that we are having with us. So, suppose this is XYZ that I'm trying to measure, and I have penned down list of questions which I think would be measuring this what I'm trying to measure. So, what we are measuring does not matter to us because we are just trying to understand the concept. So, now suppose this question 39, if you can look at this thing. Now, I have penned down 39 questions which I feel are actually trying to measure consumerism. Now this is for consumerism. All right, so now this 39 that I'm having here are to be looked at in parallel to those 300 pools of items. Now suppose I have these 39 items which I have in my pool, and now I would like to see which one of these 39 should I keep, which means which one of out of these 300 should I keep and which one should I not keep. So what domain sampling model says is that there is a correlation matrix that I can generate. All right. Now mathematics are coming into picture. So I would take help of SPSS. I will give a command which essentially will give me a correlation matrix. So we will maybe we will discuss it at some point of time when we will do SPSS. So, but the idea here is to just look at that having this correlation matrix what to do. So I will try to generate a matrix which is a correlation matrix actually. So let me also get rid of this. So I have taken all these 39 items and I will go to statistics, and I have clicked onto this correlations which will give me inter-item correlation. Inter-item correlation would mean correlation between first question and second question, correlation between first question and third question. So the way it will give me. I've also checked down to descriptives. So descriptives in research we call as mean, median, mode, skewness, and kurtosis. That are measure of central tendency. That is what we meant by descriptive. So scale if item deleted, I will tell you what these are. So now I'll click on to OK, and this is my output sheet of SPSS. Right. So now let us directly come to something that we were trying to understand, and this is this thing. This is my correlation matrix. I'm copying it, all right, and I'm getting back to Excel, the sheet, and I've pasted it. All right. So this is my question number one. So correlation between question number one and one is one. That will always be, because two similar things or two same things actually will be correlated. All right. So this 0.05, if we are looking at it, it actually is correlation between this question, which is car company. This is about a car company. Seldom shrink their responsibility to the consumer about this and this question, which is competition ensure that consumers pay fair prices. So between these two questions, correlation is 0.05. The same way I have this thing as correlation between this question and this question. All right. So this is the correlation between this question and this question. So now, as domain sampling model was saying that you will have a large correlation matrix, and I have this large correlation matrix, which is you get down, then this is 41, which are 39 questions, and if you can come across to these columns also, then you will also find 39 questions here. So it is a big correlation matrix that we have generated. That is what domain sampling model told us. Now, getting back to domain sampling model, it now says that we have come to this infinitely large correlation matrix, all right, which is showing correlation. So we have a matrix which we were looking at it in Excel, 39 questions which we have taken to understand, and we kept it parallel to those pool of 300 statements. So now we are considering that these 39 items are my pool of items, and now I am to select some of them so that my questionnaire can be formed. All right, that is something that we are coming at. Now, what does domain sampling model now says is average correlation of this matrix. Now, this is a hell important of a point here. It says average correlation of this matrix is the extent to which some common core is present in items. All right. So, what do we mean by that? It says that we have a matrix here which actually talks of correlations between each possible items or between each possible questions that we are having. What it says is that there would be an average correlation of it also. So average correlation would mean what? Now if I can go back to Excel, now I have these correlation values, right? So if all these values can be taken, and if I can come across with an average, so that would be the average correlation. And what would that be? That is something that domain sampling model is calling it as common core. Now what is the theoretical concepts behind it? Let me try to explain. So what it is that there is something which is called as correlation, all right, and two things will be correlated if they have some association this way or that way, right? So now what actually we are trying to arrive at is every simple question that is a part of my questionnaire or is part of my pool of say 300 items. Here we are having 39 items. Now each question is trying to measure something, and each question will have a uniqueness. All right, that is what I am coming up to now. Now this uniqueness is something in behavioral studies we say that this uniqueness is separate for each and each question, but the very fact that all these pool of items has been generated keeping in mind the construct that we are trying to measure. So there has to be some part of each and every questions which actually is addressing to the measurement issue that I am having in my hands. So if I have this 39 items measuring XYZ, if I have those 300 pool of items that we have taken example of as measuring satisfaction level, so part of these questions would be measuring satisfaction level because that is something that they have been developed for. All right. And what it what level of these questions, what it is that it is trying to measure, all right, what extent of all these questions combined will actually measure for what they have been formulated will be told to us by this common core. This common core is the average correlation of all these things. All right. This is what domain sampling model tells us. So meaning thereby that if understand it carefully, if all these statements that I am having in my pool now, if at all they are measuring one single thing which they are designed for, then these all should be highly correlated among themselves. That is what the entire, the gist of all this discussion is. If I'm repeating it, all these items which are in my pool are measuring one thing which essentially they have been designed for, then they all should be highly correlated. All right. And if they are highly correlated, then this common correlation, then this average correlation that we are talking of would be higher. All right. And if any of these statements are actually not measuring what we intend to measure, then that question would eventually lightly correlate with other items which are trying to measure something. Now, just to put it in perspective, if I have 39 items here, if 35 out of them are measuring XYZ, but 3 are not measuring XYZ, then obviously these 3 statements would not show a strong correlation with those 35 items. So, which means that having a low correlation or a low average correlation or the low common core would mean that there are some items or there are some questions which are not measuring what they should be measured, and we have to identify those and we have to delete them. That is part of it. So to get to it how will we do? There are multiple ways of doing it, and I am just starting with the simpler way. So first of all, I will delete one. Why will I delete one? Because if I do an average of these correlations, then one will have a larger aspect of it, because we all understand and know that when we have done measure of central tendency, we found that mean is something or average is something, or is something which actually takes every data or every observation into consideration. So now if all the correlations would be in the range of zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.2 or zero point 0.3 till 0.9, and if one is 1, then one is going to have a larger impact on average. Moreover, the operation that we are going to do here is to try to find out what is the maximum correlation. So if one remains there in matrix, obviously every time one will come out. So I have to delete one. So this is what the process that I am trying to do to. So what eventually I will do is I will delete this maximum correlation, because this one actually is correlation between two statements, right? So now I am in the process of deleting these ones. So there you are, right? So I hope I am almost done. Now I have deleted all the ones out of this matrix, and now let us come on to this thing. All right, so I will select all these 39 items, right? And I will here type a formula. So I will say max. Max means maximum, right? So I say B3, and right, and I would say AM3. So I have selected the entire row, which essentially would do nothing but would give me the maximum value of this correlation. And let's get it for everyone. So this value of 0.07 is nothing, but what does it mean? This means this correlation of 0.07 is maximum, which this statement. Now let me freeze this so that we can actually know that what we are talking about. So now this is the statement. All right, the entire row that it talks about is correlation of this statement with every other statement. All right, so the very fact that I am getting the maximum out of all these is only 0.07, that means that this statement is poorly correlates with all the statements, because the maximum that it correlates with anyone is only 0.07. So which means all the other correlations are actually lower than 0.07. All right, so I will highlight it. So I am going to highlight it. All right, so now we will come down. So this statement up to the maximum extent correlates to 0.30. Okay, let's take it. So that way I have this correlation value for everyone. Now suppose I have these all values, and now I am to identify which is that statement which is actually correlating very low with all the other statements. So I would perhaps say identify this one, because it's only 0.1, and let us also highlight it. All right, so and then I would make a criteria for myself. I would say that whichever statement which has the maximum correlation less than zero point 0.3, I will highlight them. So I will get this thing also. So these two things I will get, and I will highlight them. All right, because they are 0.2. So I'll go up, and I have 0.4, 0.3, so 0.2 again come across, so I will again highlight it, and then I will again go up, and I will have this thing also in the range of 0.2, right? So I have highlighted this thing also. So now this is how I will highlight some of the statements. Now what essentially I'm trying to do, now let's get back to domain sampling model. What does it says is that if all the statements were trying to measure one thing only, then they should be highly correlated with each other. So a highly correlation would mean, now don't forget that this thing, if you look at this formula, is for max means maximum. So don't forget that this thing actually talks about the maximum correlation that this statement is having with any of these. So if maximum is that low, then domain sampling model says that they should be highly correlated, but the very fact that it is 0.007 means they are not highly correlated. And then domain sampling model says that if it is not highly correlated, then there is some problem with this statement. And but that problem is that it actually is not part of our common core. All right. So this statement actually brings the average correlation of all the statements lower, because this thing is lower and mean is affected by extreme values. If you have many values which are on the lower side of it, then your mean gets lower. Or here mean is of correlation, so the correlation gets lower. If you have higher value of correlation, then your mean correlation value, or the common core that we were talking about, will be higher. All right. So that is what we are trying to understand. So essentially, as per this inter-item correlation matrix, right, we should delete these items from our analysis or from our questionnaire thing. So it says that this actually do not measure what they were actually trying to measure. So we will not make them part of our questionnaire now. All right. So if you would like to say I will only take higher correlation, say of only zero point 0.4 range, then you will happen to select these things only. All right. Even you will delete the 0.3 things, right? So this is how you go on deleting it. But just having the maximum correlation thing, we do not delete it. Now maybe we should give these statements one more chance before deleting them out of our questionnaire thing, before deleting them out of the pool that we have selected. So now what we will do is we will actually try to measure. Now understand carefully. Now we will actually try to measure the correlation of this statement with the common correlation of all these, or the common score of all these. So if this statement that now what we are finding should be deleted is not even correlating with all these statements taken together, then short, this statement is not measuring or is not worth taking ahead. Now that is something in statistics that we call as item to total correlation. Now this correlation was with individual statements, but now we will take correlation of this statement with all these statements, item to total. All right. So in SPSS I've generated that thing also. Let's get back to output. All right. Now this is something which is an important table for me. Now this is item to total statistics, as you can see written on the top of it. So what does it tell us? Now if this is my statement of the pool, it says that correlation thing. All right. Now in this SPSS thing, one thing which I forgot to tell you is this correlation. The parallel measurement of this correlation, which is a standard one in statistics, is Cronbach alpha. Alright, so Cronbach alpha is something which is a coefficient which only tells us about the degree of correlation between any two things. So we would now be looking at a Cronbach alpha. So higher the Cronbach alpha means higher the correlation, lower the Cronbach alpha would mean lower is the correlation. So now have a look at this thing, which is very important for us to understand. Now there is this statement, all right, this competition. Have a look at the cursor. Competition ensures that consumers pay fair prices. Now if we go back to this thing Excel, we know we have highlighted it in yellow, so that means this statement is creating problems. Now let us recheck it by item to total thing. Now, this is something which is Cronbach's alpha if item deleted. All right. What does it tell you is that if this question number 1, is not made a part of our questionnaire, then Cronbach alpha would be 0.645. All right. Now that is an important thing. All right. What is Cronbach alpha now? For that I will go back up. All right. So in the beginning there would be a coefficient alpha value, so that is standardized items I would look at, it is 0.580. all right. So this is the current status of Cronbach alpha, or you would call it as common core. So 0.58, I have to increase it. All right. So which means I have to delete some items. So now it is 0.580, and this table tells us that if I delete this item out of my questionnaire, then my Cronbach alpha will go to 0.645, which is a jump. So that means that this statement is creating a problem, and that perhaps is not part of our questionnaire, and that perhaps should not be taken ahead. All right. So now you would look at this thing. Wherever you see a sudden jump from your current value of Cronbach alpha, then you say that that statement is a problematic statement for me, and I should consider it deleting. So whenever you see a sudden jump, so see 0.645, now here it is 0.601. Now that statement is important over the past several years, because this is actually not skying up the Cronbach alpha, which is correlation for me. So any that statement by deleting which, if I get a higher value of Cronbach alpha, I would delete that statement, and that we have to see vis-a-vis to this thing. All right. So same way, I will keep on doing it. That's what domain sampling model talks to us, and I will keep on deleting the statement. Now suppose I delete now this thing, all the yellow ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all right, uh, 6 and 7 out of these 39, then I will be left with 32 statements, right? And for these 32 statements, I will do the same operations. I will try to calculate correlation matrix. I will try to see what is the maximum correlation now these things are having among themselves. Now I will be trying to see what is the item to total correlation, looking at this SPSS thing. So if again item to total correlation suddenly increases, the Cronbach alpha suddenly increases by deleting that item, then we have to delete it and not to make a part of our questionnaire. So the example that we took of satisfaction, wherein we were talking of 300 odd items in our pool, out of these 300 odd items, there would be lot many items which would be showing a correlation value close to 0, or Cronbach alpha skying up too much when we are deleting that item. So all those items are to be deleted. So that is something that is a process that we have to follow. Keep on following, unless this is an important thing, unless we get a satisfactory value of Cronbach alpha here. Alright, now suppose we are having 0.580 now, deleting 2 or 3 items, I will be having this value as say 0.645. Alright, so I would say, as a researcher, I would make it a benchmark that I would not be accepting the questions in a questionnaire unless I get a Cronbach alpha value of zero point 0.7. So zero point 0.7 is my benchmark, and that is an industrial benchmark. In industry, in research, we say that at least a Cronbach alpha has to be 0.7. If it is below it, then we do not say that these all questions are highly related, and that is Cronbach alpha is also a measure of reliability. All right, maybe we will discuss reliability some other time, but we should make it a point that I have to select those statements by which I can get Cronbach alpha equal to say 0.7. Right, so I will keep on doing this exercise. I'll keep on deleting the statement unless I get a good value of Cronbach alpha. This is what your model says. All right, so this is what that we have discussed, right? So here you are, average correlation, key assumption belong to domain of the construct, have an equal amount of common core. That is something that we have discussed. That further means that if all the items in a measure are drawn from the domain of single construct, responses to these items should be highly correlated. That is something we have already discussed about. And then we will be checking reliability. Reliability is something that I have touched upon. Cronbach alpha is nothing but is a measure of reliability only. So likewise, we will keep on deleting the questions, and ultimately I have the questions which would essentially be measuring something which I intend to measure. This is how I do it. All right. And now I will say that out of these 300 pools, or the example that we took practically here of 39 items, I would say that I have deleted say 30 of them. I am only left with 9 items. It is only with 9 items that I get a Cronbach alpha value of 0.8. If I have taken 0.8 as threshold, I will only go ahead with these 8 items, and this is my questionnaire. Now, having built this questionnaire, let it be tested at other parts of the globe also. And if other people also in these 8 items that you have specified gets a Cronbach alpha of 0.8, gets a Cronbach alpha of 0.9, gets a Cronbach alpha of 0.75, and which means that it is actually giving you good results in different parts of the globe, and that is how a scale becomes a standardized one, and now you can call it a scale, and that is how a questionnaire is developed. Even if you doing at your end gets a Cronbach alpha of 0.8, but it is not generating the similar Cronbach alpha at some other places, then we would not call it, it is a standard thing. It will not eventually be a standard thing, because it is a it is something which is giving you good results within some domains or within territories of some nation. In India it is giving me results, but when I take it to China it is giving me Cronbach alpha of 0.1. No use, it cannot be accepted worldwide, it cannot be a generalized measure of that construct, right? It has to consistently give a good value of Cronbach alpha, you constantly give good results, and only then it will be accepted as a standard questionnaire, and it is only then that we start calling it a scale. And now it is a scale, can be used at any point of time at any place irrespectively to measure the construct that it has been designed for, right? So this is something about formulation of questionnaire. So this is it from my end. So if you have any questions pertaining to this, then you may please ask. So did it make sense? You understood it? Okay, so this is how you formulate a questionnaire. So any questions, please? Okay, thanks, Manjula. It's always there. Yes, you can always go and touch on to the tools that